Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Perspectives on Sustainable Development. I'm your host, Chris Whitehead, and we have an interesting one to talk about today. A lot of you guys might not actually know because I spend my time 20 years now plus actually doing largely air quality work and obviously the EJ and social stuff. But I really actually started out doing land use, and my master's thesis was on something called cultural ecosystem services and the benefits of public parks using two parks, St. Mary's in South Bronx and Palmer Park in Detroit, Michigan. Pardon me, and talk about the positive development that we could possibly get from each and a little bit of history there. So it's always been a topic I've been interested in, but really brings me back to something I've been trying to learn more about how Native Americans I've always felt tied to the land and how it's actually a spiritual thing for them and how frankly far off I think our culture is from that. And I try to be as objective as I can on all this stuff. And living in a capitalist world, I understand that the economics always have to come first. But to plan, and I say this all the time, but to plan for any major project, you really have to think about the economics, the environmental, and the social aspects of that project and how it's going to impact local areas. um Again, it feels unfortunately like we're getting further and further away from that now, and there are a lot of policies being pushed by the current administration, for better or worse, that really only largely focus on economics. And again, I think that's short-sighted for a lot of reasons, but it also just doesn't incorporate the full risks and full toll of a project. And last thought before I bring on our experts for today, the natural world has a lot of inherent benefits, but it also has safeguards and buffers for mitigating climate change. If we just pull back a little bit and kind of leave things alone, over time the world will settle out because there are incredible inherent benefits and processes that just tend to balance out over time, but not if we don't allow them. So just final thought. We're not on a great path, honestly, right now. And I try to always be as optimistic and positive as I can, but it isn't great, guys. So maybe our guest today might be able to put us on a little bit happier of note because I don't know if I woke up in a spicy mood today, but or maybe need more coffee, one or two. We'll find out. But I'm excited for the chat today. We have two experts in the field who have been doing this for very, very, very long time and probably going to frankly teach me a couple of things. In no particular order, we have Taj Schottland from the Trust for Public Land and Jacob Malcom from Next Interior. If you guys can come on, please. Good morning. How are you guys doing?
Doing all right. How about
Beautiful.
yourself?
Like I said, I'm a little salty this morning. I'm not sure why. So hopefully our chat will put me in a better mood.
We will make sure that happens.
Appreciate that. I gave a very, very brief intro for each of you, but can you each give a couple minutes on how you first got into this field and a little bit of background, maybe?
Sure. Yeah, I can start. Yeah, first off, Chris, thank you for having us on this podcast. Um, and Jacob, it's wonderful to join you on this. So my name's Taj Schottland. I'm the Director of Climate Resilience at the Trust for Public Land. And our mission is to create parks and protect land for people, to create healthy, livable communities. We're one of the largest parks and conservation nonprofits in the US. We have about 30 field offices around the country, developing parks in low-income neighborhoods around the country, conserving land, really with the goal of helping connect everyone to the outdoors. And my start, sort of my personal story, I got to start as a kid. It was actually local land trusts that had conserved some land nearby where I grew up and had put in trails that went up to this mountain vista. And I was a kid. I was already sort of predisposed to appreciating nature. Uh, but I had watched, I think it was a David Attenborough documentary about it was harpy eagles and all of these crazy wildlife in the jungle. And then my parents took me to this close to home park and these trails that led up to this mountain. And I walked up, it had been conserved by a land trust. We walked up to the top, and there were all these folks up there that were counting hawks flying by that were migrating over. And they called out, there is a Sharpie. And I thought, like a harpy eagle, like the eagle that's in the jungle that eats sloths. We have them in my backyard. And they said, no, no. Not a harpy eagle. It's called a sharpie. It's a sharp-shinned hawk. And they thought it was just hilarious that this little kid knew about these eagles in the jungle and was interested in these hawks that were flying by close to home. And they sort of took me under their wing, sort of pun intended, and started showing me about the amazing nature that was right in my backyard. And so that close to home park was what sort of was my spark to the outdoors, to appreciating nature. And it sort of launched my interest in college and then career, studying birds, studying climate change. Climate change is impacting our communities and it's impacting bird populations. And then I ended up here at the Trust for Public Land, where we're really focused on parks and conservation to connect everyone to the outdoors, but then also connecting it to climate and health and equity and strengthening communities. So it's been a fun journey that started with that close to home park for me when I was a kid.
Absolutely love that. And I have to admit, when you first said Sharpie, I thought you were going to be talking about the marker.
Yeah. I'm a bird nerd at heart, so there may be some other bird stories that work their way into this podcast, even though we're talking about land use and climate.
No, fair enough. And honestly, it's great to have you. I've been following your work for a few years now and heard nothing but good things. So again, welcome.
Good to be here.
Awesome. Jacob?
Awesome. It's interesting for how many people birds are an entree. They're like a gateway drug to nature. And I mean that in a good way, not in the dark way that it may seem at first. Similar thing for me growing up. I grew up out in Shenandoah Valley in Front Royal, Virginia, next to Shenandoah National Park, and grew up running around in the woods and catching critters and watching birds. My mom loves to tell a story of going on a school field trip to some place, to a state or park, maybe, or maybe a national park, I don't know. And there being some birds over in the cattails, and the park ranger asking, does anybody know what that is? And I raised my hand and said, well, that's a red-winged blackbird. They're all over the place. And it was. And that was just, it was one of those connections that was really important in my life arc and my career arc, starting from playing around in the woods and being a Boy Scout and all those sorts of things, to being a field biologist in Virginia and in Michigan, and then down in New Mexico and Arizona for about a decade before returning to national policy work, first with an NGO and then back at the Department of the Interior, where I was the director of Office of Policy Analysis and a couple of other roles for a while. In that role at Interior, one of the major undertakings, one of the major deliveries for my office was the department's climate adaptation policies. This was a group of 6 policies that really focused on how the Department of the Interior, largest land manager in the country, could shape climate adaptation, could build resilience. My office was in charge of the ecosystem restoration program, which was part of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, so nearly $1 billion for ecosystem restoration. And one of the criteria for the projects that were funded through that was, how does this increase climate resilience? So it's an important part. I had departed Interior in early 2025 and started Next Interior as a project to advocate for the Department of the Interior, for the public lands and wildlife, for the science that Interior does, for the service to Indian country that is part of the United States obligations and where Interior has a big role to play. And that work is ongoing. Climate is part of that work. It has to be, because changing climate is just the reality. It's just physics.
No, absolutely
So
agree with that.
thanks for having me on here, Chris. Really appreciate it, and good to be here with you, Taj.
Awesome. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Not agree, that's the wrong word, but a couple of things you guys both said resonated with me. And actually, the episode before yours that I just posted yesterday tells a story about how I first got hooked. I didn't know even actually know at the time on environmental work by visiting 4-H camp and spending a week out in just the hills of New Jersey, and swinging into a river and playing with friends and just asking people what's that bird or what's that animal, and just trying to learn more and find myself interested in all of that. But I wonder, just to transition here, I guess, a little bit, if you guys had some thoughts on what I was discussing in my open, that there seems to be almost a dichotomy, or I would say a false narrative, really, about how development in this country, and I should say industrial development, has to be adverse to biological and climate protections. And I don't think that's accurate. I think there's a way to do this right, as I said, that incorporates the full range of impacts from a project, economic, environmental, and social, that can be in tune with this stuff and actually sustainable. So, is there a correct way to do this that um I don't want to say doesn't get enough attention, but doesn't fall into the trap of one side against another?
Sure. Yeah, I can start. So I think absolutely. So it comes down to designing with nature and recognize, for me, I think designing with nature and recognizing all of the ecosystem services, all of the benefits that it can provide. And when you do a development, you can integrate green infrastructure, green space, park space that delivers all of these benefits. And they're not sort of they shouldn't be afterthoughts and viewed as a nice to have amenity if there's funding left over, right? They are core to creating these healthy, vibrant communities. They're important for people's health, for their well-being. It protects the infrastructure. There are all these climate resilience benefits, and there's some great stories and data that I can share as we go on around the role of parks and green space in actually protecting people from extreme heat, from flooding, protecting critical infrastructure that developers are creating and that are important for city infrastructure. And so, really shifting the paradigm and the thought process of green space as a nice to have amenity instead as critical infrastructure that's core to a smart development process. I think that's the fundamental shift that needs to happen. The green space, it's infrastructure and should be viewed and valued accordingly. And I'm curious, Chris, as well, if you want to share, you were mentioning you were valuing in your research the ecosystem service of parks. And we do that at Trust for Public Land, where you're valuing the health benefits, the stormwater benefits, the air pollution benefits, the outdoor recreation benefits. And so there are all of these services that you can put a dollar value to and bake that into broader development efforts.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how life happens, right? As I said, wrote the paper on the park in the Bronx and on the park in Michigan, and thought I was going to be going in a land use track, but then, to be honest, couldn't find a job for a while on that, and I also like air stuff, so I ended up going with air, and that's kind of the path I chose, and it's been a good one for me. But I've always had an interest in these topics as well.
Air is one of those, speaking of, ecosystem services and the values, air is an easy one for people to understand because if you
Yeah.
can't breathe, you die, right? Like it's pretty direct connection there.
Yeah.
Um, there is, even if it's an indirect connection to the land, to the water, those we're on a finite planet and we depend on nature, all of the things that we depend on. This was the premise of the previous administration's focus on developing natural capital accounts for the nation to start to value those things that we take for granted. If you don't count it, you don't manage it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really liked working at Interior was zooming out to the work that of the many competing priorities that affect people's lives. I say competing not to overemphasize trade-offs, but there are these trade-offs. Public lands are a part of that, but for Interior, it also means that conservation and use. It means water and wildlife, energy and landscapes, serving sovereign tribal nations, which has its own set of challenges. Um, you can drill down also. You can think about managing just one piece of public land and the need to balance, say, conservation mandate and public access mandate. You have to do both of those. People hiking by can disturb nesting birds so that they don't have the same productivity they would have without that access. Trails will wear out, people's experiences will decline. But because people want all these things at the same time. We want the wildlife, we want the hike, we want all of this, right? Like this is just human nature. One of the roles of government, it doesn't have to just be federal government. It's local government, it's state government, it's how we work as a society, is figuring out how to balance that. And I think one of the things people don't understand is we have a really good idea of how to get that balance. It takes leadership and it takes experience. A lot of the institutional knowledge that is being lost, for example, at the federal level right now, has built up an understanding of how to navigate trade-offs and to find, I hate to use the word synergies, but to find synergies, to find ways that you can feed two birds with one seed rather than saying, no, we've got to take something here. We've been doing it for a long time. There are really good arguments that America has been a global model for how you do this well. We've made mistakes, but we've also figured out how to do this. And I think that it's maybe not enough people recognize that we do actually have a lot of answers to a really complex world that we live in. And we can build on that and we can keep doing better. There are some trade-offs, but there are lots of win-win situations that we can have when it comes to sustainable development, to meeting people's needs and conserving nature. We can't meet people's needs without conserving nature. If we don't have nature, then people's needs will not be met.
I think that's a critical point that often gets lost, frankly. Um, and I agree with what you said before, obviously, about the impacts of air emissions. I read an article, in fact, this morning that had I think it was 10 or 15 worst or highest concentrations of particulate matter in cities across the world. And it shouldn't shock anybody. They were all tied to industrial corridors all overseas in India and Pakistan and countries like that. Not to say anything necessarily bad about them, obviously, but there's a direct correlation, an obvious one between the air emissions and health impacts. But Jacob, as you were talking there, I got to thinking about the idea that I hear often in New Jersey about mixed use developments and the idea of, oh, I want to have housing and I want to have restaurants, I want to have this and that, and access to biking trails all within a small amount or a small area. Um, it's how to phrase this. I don't know. It was kind of on a larger scale too. Like, can you do that for major projects, or can large scale developers be more thoughtful in how they want to go about getting that mixed use development, I'm calling it, and getting all kind of checking all the boxes and getting all the benefits in that you possibly can and still advance their project? Because I have a lot of people asking me, frankly, about what's being asked of us. How do we incorporate climate risk? How much of this do we have to incorporate? And there's that discussion between have to and it would be damn wise if you did. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I'll pick up on the theme that I had in the first part, which is that we do actually know how to do this reasonably well. At the federal level, one of the solutions that we worked out in the early 1970s was the National Environmental Policy Act. NEPA is a process to think through and have a discussion about how to do these things well, about how to balance the needs, and do so in a democratic fashion so that the public has a way to have a voice in the government decisions that affect their lives, that affect the environment. And you can do this for big projects. You need to be thoughtful about it, and you need to look before you leap. And as my former boss from Fish and Wildlife used to say, don't jump to concussions. He had a fantastic picture that his brother took of him jumping across a creek, except he was clearly not going to make it across the creek. The creek was bigger. He was jumping to a concussion. Um, we can do this by being thoughtful, by not, for example, declaring an energy emergency to go and waive all of these processes and all of these laws. Um, there are the have tos and the nice tos, and sometimes people, I think it gets back to what Taj was saying. Sometimes folks are thinking about environmental considerations, conservation considerations, climate considerations as nice to haves, but really they are must haves. You know, Endangered Species Act is an example. This is a mandate from Congress. The requirements of the Endangered Species Act. You have to do these things. You have to avoid the particular actions that are in the Endangered Species Act because they are part of our values. And we know they're part of our values because they're part of our legal system. The other things may be nice to have, but protecting the environment, protecting species, protecting the places that they live, taking action for a livable planet, livable climate, these are must haves rather than nice to haves. And we have processes for doing that. Things are better now than they were in the past because we have figured out ways to make it work.
No, there's a lot of truth definitely to that. And if you look at almost any environmental trend line in this country over the last 50 years, when environmental regs first came in, most of them are drastically improved. So that's obviously encouraging. But Taj, can, or how about this? Is taking climate action by individual companies smart for a lot of reasons, but also just the fact that it also supports their workforce, because a lot of these tangible actions that can be taken happen locally where a lot of these people live. So it also makes for, just to put it bluntly, a nice place to live.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll answer that. And I also want to go back to sort of the importance of mixed use development and not sort of this false dichotomy. But yeah, so I think we need climate action on all fronts. So federal, state, local, public agencies, individuals, and then absolutely corporations as well. And we partner with corporations on local climate projects. So tree planting projects, park projects, they come in and they support our work and they support on the ground activations. And so one example, we have several corporate partners that support our New York City community schoolyards program. So these are uh, projects that take barren asphalt uh, playgrounds that are, quote, playgrounds, but they're really just a parking lot and a chain link fence. And we go in, we do a participatory design process with the students to reimagine what their schoolyard could look like. We partner with the city Department of Environmental Protection to bring in sophisticated green stormwater infrastructure, and then we plant trees, put in green infrastructure to manage stormwater, and we bring in corporate funding and corporate support to support and augment the work. So it's not just public funding. There's not quite enough funding just to do it with public funding. The corporates can't come in and fund all of the capital. And so we bring all of that together to do these incredible transformations that create these vibrant play spaces for kids, bringing in corporate employee activation events where they're helping plant the trees with the kids, clean up, maintain the area. So these really impactful projects that blend a mix of corporate stewardship and public agency participation to lead to these transformative projects that the before and afters are just incredible. If you want to, you can probably go find this. Just Google, Trust for Public Land Community Schoolyards in New York, and they're incredible before and after photos where you can just sort of see the change that happens. So that's sort of on the corporate side. Going back to your question to Jacob around sort of mixed use development. And I think it is really important to recognize the importance of smart urban development. And so people that live in urban cores generally have lower sort of personal greenhouse gas emissions. They're not traveling as far. They have their recreation, they have their work, they have their, grocery stores all locally. And so generally you have less emissions. And when you do that smart growth in an urban core, you prevent harmful development and permanent conversion of forest lands. And our forests are super important climate solutions. And so I think they sequester about 13 or 14% of our our US emissions on an annual basis. And so preventing that forest loss is critical. And one of the main drivers of forest loss is this urban sprawl that goes out. And so smart, dense, mixed-use development that brings in green space that still makes sure to prevent, the growth of urban heat islands, manage stormwater on site. To Jacob's point, we know how to do this. We know how to do it well, and there are cities and there are developers that are doing it well. But it's really important to support those efforts in the urban core so that we don't go in and convert these beautiful landscapes that are not just beautiful, but they're also serving double duty as climate solutions.
But Taj, all that takes too long, man.
It can take some time, and doing it right, doing it right uh, is not necessarily the easy and fast way to do it, but it does lead to those sort of more sustainable outcomes, develops community buy-in, and leads to the types of communities that we would actually want to live in and feel proud to live in.
Nah, I was joking, obviously there, but I want to pick
That
up on
that
one thing.
is that
Go ahead,
was
Jacob,
one thing
please.
that I just wanted to just
Please.
echo what Taj was saying there at the end in particular about how this is durable change because it shifts the baseline of what people experience and what they know and what they then expect. Because if you ask somebody to go back to bad ways of doing things after they have experienced these sorts of slower to develop but overall higher quality ways to live, people don't want to do that. They've had a taste of a better way to do things, and it creates a feed forward loop of better ways to proceed into the future. And so that durability, that cultural change is really critical.
That makes sense, but devil's advocate on that also, doing the individual projects at the smaller scale locally, like Taj was talking about, does that move the needle on climate?
Yes, and I mean, yes, it does, and we need systemic changes that are larger than any single project, and we can start to get there, I think, through the that accumulation of small projects that changes hearts and minds by helping people visualize because they've experienced a better future, a better option. I don't, it's going to be hard to just flip a switch and say, okay, we're going to make this systemic change if people have no conception of what that might be.
Completely agree. I think it's all of the above. And I remember actually, this was going back to now a while ago, my college, my senior thesis, we went to the UN climate negotiations in Copenhagen back in 2008 or 2009,
That's freaking
2009
awesome, dude.
probably. It was a wild experience, but it was also, I learned a tremendous amount, have incredible respect for the folks that are able to engage at that global level. And those are the levers that are going to be really important, but it moves at a snail's pace.
Yeah.
And there are 10 setbacks for every step forward, it can feel like, including at the Copenhagen, the negotiations that I attended. And so actually after that going to Copenhagen, seeing that failure, I stepped away from climate for a little while because I was like, this is going to move too slowly. I want to see change that happens now, and I want to be part of change that you can sort of see. And so, working at the municipal level, the state level, and then even up to the federal level, it we can make change a little bit faster, and then people can see it in their personal life and feel it and touch it and experience it. And so we need the people that are working at, at the UN climate global scale to reduce climate change and address that. But we also need folks that are working at the local level to do those projects. And I found sort of my personal sweet spot is in the local and state policy work and project implementation because it's a little bit easier. It's not easy, but it's a little bit easier to see the change and affect change a little bit more quickly and effectively.
Interesting. And Taj, a lot of the projects you mentioned thus far have been urban, located in various cities across the country. How does your work differ, urban versus rural?
Yeah, so we do urban park projects in low income, city cores of the urban core of the cities. And then we'll do a lot of large land conservation work in more rural areas and do trail development. In when we think about it from a climate perspective, in the urban centers, the park projects that we're designing are really focused around mitigating extreme heat, urban stormwater runoff. When we get to more rural areas where we're doing large scale conservation projects, we're looking at the carbon value, so protecting carbon rich landscapes. We want to both protect the carbon that's in the land and then also protect the value of that land in acting as a carbon sink, carbon sequestration. So actually essentially vacuuming carbon out of the atmosphere. So we're looking at maximizing the carbon benefits. And then there's also the flood component when we're talking about climate change as well. So when you're protecting a landscape, you're protecting a floodplain, you're protecting drinking water supplies. And there was a cool project here in Vermont. We're doing land conservation work. It's in the Otter Creek Basin. And there was research that UVM did, University of Vermont, that looked at that floodplain. So it's not in the city, not that Vermont has too many cities. It's not in the town, the large town. But this conservation work is actually providing direct flood benefits to the community that's downstream of this conservation work. And so they valued that intact floodplain that Trust Public Land and many others are working to conserve is providing, I think it was $450,000 a year on average in flood reduction benefits for the community. And back, it was a while ago, was it Hurricane Irene created incredible, just sort of devastating damage across the state and flood damages. And it was about $2 million in flood protection value that was put to this protected floodplain.
Hmm.
And so there are direct benefits to our urban cores, even when you're doing these conservation projects outside of a downtown.
Yeah. I just want to touch on something you just
The,
said there too that I find really, really interesting, that the natural systems, the trees, the biomes, all have various climate benefits. And if you think about it, as development keeps increasing and climate impacts, unfortunately, also keep increasing, we have less available acreage of just natural systems available to do the sort of flood protection and um, cooling aid that you were alluding to before. So I mentioned earlier that I was in a little bit of a sour mood coming in today into this chat this morning, because if you look at a lot of the climate trend lines, we are not on good tracks at all. So I'm not sure how to phrase the question, but do you have any thoughts on
Jacob, were you trying to jump in? Or, and then I can
I was
answer.
going to
Yeah.
follow up, and I think that it's a nice tee up. So I was going to follow up on what you're saying, Taj, and it gets to what you're saying, Chris. One of the biggest losses from development is it does include the loss of those specific acres and the natural and functioning ecosystem, the carbon that is stored in soil or the biota, all of that. But it's also a loss of resilience. It's a loss of the ability to bounce back from change, not having those areas for things to move back and forth. I live out here in central Maryland. It's right at the edge of the urban suburban into rural transition. Very, very apparent as you go right past here. And this area and out to the west in Western Maryland is one of the biggest, one of the most important linkages up and down the Appalachians in the face of climate change. It's just really critical that you have the ability for plants and animals to be able to move north or south, depending on what's happening, the details there. And this is one of those things, thinking at the landscape scale, how do these individual projects, actions taken, how do these pile up and affect resilience? How do they affect landscape scale um, adaptation or adaptability? At Interior, for example, those climate policies, a couple of them were very landscape focused because we needed to be thinking about, yes, there are specific management requirements for a particular tract, but we need people to step back and think about this action combined with that action combined with this action over there, and think about how do the dots connect, think about what it means for the landscape, the ecosystem, the species, but also, from an environmental justice standpoint and an equity standpoint, are you going to end up having communities that bear the brunt of accepting the cost? Could those be rural communities? Could there be real benefits? And I think what Taj was talking about with TPL's work in rural areas and protection and development of trails, et cetera, those landscape level views are important. Again, we knew that this was something that needed to be done from a policy standpoint, and I think broadly we understand that this is we understand how to approach this problem. We just need to then take the action to do it, and having that broad buy-in across levels, not just federal, not just Interior, but all across society is going to be really important. But we can do it.
We can, and I'll just build on two things. So, Jake, I'm glad that you brought up the equity component, because that is central, whether it's the urban or the rural. When we're talking about conservation, parks, resilience, that is really critical, because we're not all experiencing and have the same level of vulnerability to climate hazards. And to Chris, your point of the trend lines are not great, right? There's reason feel a little bit sour and to feel a little bit, frankly, sometimes scared of the sort of the trajectory that we're on. And even if we stopped all emissions right now, right, we're still locked in. Our generation, your kids, we're going to be experiencing the impacts of climate change for the rest of our lives. And we're nowhere close to sort of shutting off the spigot. And so then we need to continue to push for the policies that reduce the emissions, but we also have to take a hard look at how we protect people from these climate hazards, and particularly those who are most vulnerable, unhoused, people that are working outside. And there are significant threats already today that communities are experiencing. I think extreme heat is one of the most prevalent in urban and in rural settings. I think it's like 65,000 people go to the ER every year right now as a result of extreme heat, and heat waves, I think, have even tripled compared to the long-term average. Already they've tripled, and the projections are going to get a lot worse. And so we need lots of different solutions to help protect people. One of the areas that we work at Trust for Public Land is around right parks and conservation as a solution, and tailoring those solutions to address these specific hazards. And so park projects that we'll work on, we'll design them in ways to maximize the cooling benefits. And we've partnered with folks that show it's 10, 15 degrees cooler in these park spaces that we're creating. And then those benefits extend beyond the park space to cool the entire neighborhood. And so thinking about these sort of innovative strategies where, right, parks, we're not quote unquote working on climate, and yet we also are. And so helping folks understand whatever sector they're working in, how to do their work in ways that can help address these hazards, protect the folks that are most vulnerable, because whether we like it or not, we're sort of locked into this the effects of climate change. And so we got to figure out how to address it and keep people safe.
I'm happy the conversation shifted a little bit to the overburden areas because frankly, once I first understood and really understood the topic about 7 years ago, it changed the trajectory of my professional life. And when you see the data and kind of get immersed in it, you can't unsee it. And it's just everywhere. And I think it's unfortunate that people often think of overburdened communities as only the Newarks, Camdens, the ultra congested urban minority populations. And that's not always the case. The face of this is different around the country, but it is a problem, a pervasive problem all around the country. So that's why this type of work is so critically important. Um, but I almost wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't find a way to include a data center's question in each of these chats now because I'm doing a lot of work on the topic and the potential, frankly, for impacts to our social baselines and our natural and built infrastructures. And I read a study recently, you guys might have also come across this, that data center development in Northern Virginia increased local urban heat island effects by something like up to 9 degrees, which is insane. But if you look at the size of these buildings and just the amount of concrete involved, I guess you could start to understand it. So I guess my question to you guys is how much of a risk is sprawl?
It's an 11. It's an 11 on a 1 to 10, like turn it up to 11.
Yeah.
It's it's going to be rough. I don't think that we are there collectively. I think that we're going to end up in a space where society is going to say we need a super fund for this kind of development to offset all of the things to recover. It's going to take a while for it to sink in and for people to understand the consequences of these decisions and what the sprawl means. And it's I live right across the river from Loudoun County where these huge data centers are developed, so it's something I see really regularly. The costs are tremendous. Is it going to be, a 3 mile island? level of awareness? Probably not. And I hope not. But it's going to be a big deal, and we're going to have to figure out a way un to offset or unwind some of the harms to people, the harms to knowledge coming from the growth of these tools, and then of course the harm to the planet, the harm to the environment. Those three pieces are just tremendous. So yeah, it's a big deal.
And just to load you up with one more, and also want to hear from Taj on this as well. The federal energy dominance policy has been built in large parts to address the growing needs from data centers. And you understand it objectively. You have a growing demand for energy, so you want to get as much localized energy as you can. But those choices, and especially those hurried choices, have real effects. Um, Taj or Jacob,
Yeah, if
I
I can
didn't
only
phrase that as a
jump in
question,
just to
so
say,
sorry.
I just want to call out, like, continue to beat the drum and calling out that there is no energy emergency. Are there things that need to be addressed? Absolutely. But almost nothing of what the current administration has done when it comes to declaring emergencies has been an actual emergency. It's just a get, you know, get rich quick scheme or something like that. I don't know how to put it. It's short circuiting systems that have been put in place over the decades to keep people and the planet safe, and they just don't like them. They want to run fast and break things. And we saw one consequence of this yesterday. So we're recording this on April 1st. Yesterday, March 31st, the Department of the Interior convened a bunch of members of the cabinet and the Secretary of the Army to have the Endangered Species Committee, which is established under the Endangered Species Act, quote unquote, waive the Endangered Species Act for oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico. In 15 minutes, they had decided that the species that are protected by the act in the Gulf of Mexico don't need that protection, that oil and gas was more important, despite the fact that there's no data to suggest that there is a barrier, that the Endangered Species Act was a barrier. A lot of this is just the MO of this administration. They want to do things to show that they can do it and to charge ahead. Energy dominance, this is all about saying, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to dominate you. And that's what we're left with. And so we're going to continue to have these sorts of actions in the coming months and years. It's going to take a while to undo. There are other things that can be done. There are the actions at the state and local level that are going to be able to offset or mitigate some of these harms, but some of it's inherently federal, and it's just that's the nature of the game. It's the nature of our system. So let me stop and let Taj jump in so that you can take it.
Yeah, no, well said, Jacob. And I mean, I guess just on a personal level, I'm glad you mentioned what's happening in the Gulf. So my first job out of college was working on the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill back in 2010. Um, and we were studying the impacts of that spill on bird populations, both sort of the short-term acute impacts, how many birds were oiled, what species, and then long-term impacts on bird populations, and the impact of oiling on not only the birds but on the vegetation, which then increased erosion, and you'd see islands disappearing because the mangroves were killed off and then weren't holding the island in place. And so birds that were nesting on that island had to find new places. And so I mean, it sort of just it breaks my heart a little bit and gives me some fear of, what happens next as you expand the energy dominance in places with vulnerable wildlife, vulnerable habitats. You're just sort of asking for another big tragedy.
And that's honestly what I was getting at, what the likely objective realities of these policy choices would be. And it's funny you brought up the the large oil spill because I'm actually teaching that in my course right now, reputational risk at Rutgers, and obviously where did BP go wrong and what steps did they take after to hopefully not have something like this happen again. Um, but again, rushing and only focusing on, in my mind anyway, part of the much broader picture here brings on inherent risks and does real damages. And obviously, I hope nothing of that scale happens again, but even smaller, localized damages, if they're happening everywhere, isn't exactly a good thing either. So I know we're coming up on time here a little bit, but I wanted to shift to the final question before we get to final thoughts. And we've all alluded to this a bit over the last 40 minutes or so, but there's been a large loss of institutional knowledge, not only at the federal level, but across multiple industries due to the policy choices of the last 18 months or so. Can you talk a little bit as to the damage that loss of institutional knowledge is going to have on climate resiliency and just pulling back a little bit on our society as a whole, if you want to add in a little bit on that as well?
Sure. It's I don't think that it's possible to overstate just how badly the loss of institutional knowledge is in federal agencies, and the ways that that ripples across society is harming people and the planet. The millennia of institutional knowledge that has been lost by firings, forced retirements, or other early departures. Um, at the end of the day, the phrase "no people, no service" really does hold out. There's If you don't have people in our parks, if you don't have people out there managing systems, if you don't have, they're just not serving people or the planet. And it's not just in that moment when somebody is being served, it's learning how to do this over time. Are there opportunities for any agency, for any sort of governmental entity to improve and get better at learning rather than just saying this is the way we do things? Yes, absolutely. We need government to have a culture of learning. But the approach of the past 16, 18 months, whatever it's been, has been one where they don't understand the role of government, the role of helping people get through things, helping shape cultural systems, etc. And doing that well takes time. It takes time on the ground, working with people. And if you don't have that, if you make sudden changes, then people get hurt. People will die, right? Like that's just the way it is. We're going to lose species. We're going to needlessly lose parts of our shared natural heritage because of the loss of institutional knowledge. Ridiculous mistakes are going to be made, not the fault of some civil servant somewhere, but because the system as a whole needs institutional knowledge to serve a country of 300 and some odd million people, and all of the billions of acres that are within our boundaries. No people, no service. That's just it's Yes, it matters in the moment, but it matters long term as well. Taj.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with everything you said, Jacob, but I'm thinking, Chris, your comment of feeling a little sour right now, and we said we were going to try and cheer you up a little bit and try and think about the positive side. So I'm going to try and do my best here. I completely agree with the challenges and the impacts that Jacob articulated, but I also think in times of deep turmoil, there are opportunities and ways to rebuild systems to make it more effective going forward. And so I was at an event, the Gund Institute at UVM, brought together leaders from federal policy leaders from all across the country for a few days for a gathering to think about how to what are the federal policy levers that could be used to reposition nature as a core component of the US economy. And it was this fascinating gathering. Um, there was a woman, Jane Lubachenko, who served as the administrator for NOAA under the
So Jane's
Obama
great.
administration. She was amazing, and she was talking about in times of disruption, is an opportunity to think boldly about what can come next, and that really nature is nonpartisan, and so we can create durable solutions that can work across the political spectrum. And so I say this because there are incredibly smart people thinking about what comes next. And yes, we're going to have lost an immense amount of institutional knowledge, but there is hopefully going to be an opportunity before too long, hopefully sooner rather than later, where we can rebuild, we can have the ability to pull the policy levers that can put nature as a core component of the economy, a core component of climate resilience, a core component of healthy, livable communities. So there is hope. There's a lot of bad that's happening right now, but there are some bold ideas and really smart people looking at what comes next so that we can create the world that we would want to live in.
That's a really good transition, actually, to what I was going to ask you guys for final thoughts. If you could speak directly to any of your colleagues or former colleagues or people in the same field in the sciences who might have lost their jobs or questioning if their work is still valued or if there's a future in it, what could you tell them? And again, I'm going to challenge you here to end on a hopeful note and any final thoughts you have.
I was going to use the bright light at the end of the tunnel here in closing and say that even though we've had so much loss over these past few months, I'm actually pretty optimistic that reconstruction, as it happens, and I always use the term reconstruction rather than rebuilding because it has a different connotation. When we go through reconstruction, we're going to have a chance to put to practice many of these things that we've learned, bring them back in. And the shock of the system, all of the loss and the damage that we've observed, I think is actually going to tip the scales back towards, the better times in a way that just kind of stumbling through may not have achieved. Things will have been pushed past a breaking point so that Jane's work and others, Eli Fenichel, I assume, was overgunned for the effort, and many others will have an opportunity to step in and say, okay, we had this system before, it wasn't working, it's been destroyed. Now let's go in and build it from the ground up. And I think what I would like to tell people is, no, your work has not been for vain, and now we need you to come in and help make it this better future. We can make it this better future. Right now, or maybe very recently, we've probably reached kind of a peak in anti-intellectualism. I've been reading Hofstadter again, anti-intellectualism in American society, which I read part of a long time ago, but I'm rereading it in full. This comes and goes in waves. It has for centuries in American history. We're kind of at a crescendo of that anti-intellectual train of thought, and we're going to be going back. The pendulum will swing back, and we're going to have this period where we can go through reconstruction and build a better future. And we need the people who have done this to be ready to step up and do it. We're going to need that institutional knowledge. So be ready to run, folks. We do have to be careful. You got to walk before you run, but we're also going to have an opportunity and the need to run fast and get things done.
Well said, Jacob. And I guess the only thing I'll add, sort of on a hopeful note, is the number of people that are reaching out that are interested in working in this space, right? It's both a little bit heartbreaking right now, but it's also hopeful because there are so many people that want to align their day job with making the planet a better place, more livable, more resilient. Um, and there are opportunities, whether it's at the federal, state level, municipal jobs, working in corporate sustainability. There are a lot of opportunities, and there will be more opportunities in the future to engage. And so, ideally, folks can align their day jobs to work on these, right? 9 to 5. But then there are also lots of opportunities to get engaged outside of your day job. And, even if you're a programmer, there are ways to push your company to do a little bit better, to be a little bit more sustainable, to invest locally. Um, and so whether you have climate or nature in your job title now, or you want it in the future, or you don't have that quite in your job title, there's still ways to really get engaged and to have an impact locally. And seeing that hunger from so many people is heartening. There are a lot of people that want to do good and that are doing good.
I absolutely agree
A
with
whole
that.
lot of people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think I told you guys I started teaching a course at Rutgers this semester, and because it was a new course, they told me to, 10 people, maybe 15 will sign up. I got 40. And the whole crux of it is kind of what I was talking about before, being able to first identify objectively what the impacts of a certain project are going to be and maximize the good, minimize the bad. That's essentially the gist of it. And 40 young people, juniors and seniors, and actually coming up in school now, are interested in this stuff and understand that it doesn't matter what sector you're in. Everybody, one way or another, is working a climate job now, and you have to think about this stuff and incorporate it into planning. And to see so many people buying in and being actually enthused by all this gives me a lot of energy. And just going back to the podcast, the largest demographic we have globally is around a third is actually young people. Again, studying this stuff, hoping to get a job, obviously one day, but I think at a bigger level than that, just hoping to have a positive impact with their time on Earth. So I think that's a hopeful note actually for me. And I'm going to end there and just say thank you both. I've definitely enjoyed this chat, and thank everybody actually listening here today.
Thank you.
And if you
Thank you,
both just
Chris. Great to be with you,
stay on
Taj.
also for a minute.